get time for these questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I will probably just repeat it so that we... Oh, you've got a microphone. Great. So you've got a microphone, so someone...
Just wait for me.
Just wait for her to come up to you. So right here in the front, we've got an immediate question, it looked like. Nope, you were just putting on a jacket. That's okay. Okay, right there in the middle.
Schools are primarily created to produce workers, which is not how you sell creativity, right, to schools. So how do you sell creativity to the public and the corporations that are looking for workers? Like, how do you bridge that gap, right? Because there's clearly a reason why creativity and those things that are creative aren't making it into education, because education is really, as we know it, a product of the Industrial Revolution, right? In that particular American history. So how do we make that sort of that change and cross over that? Because I don't know, I personally see that as part of the bridge, or part of the disconnect, right? I don't know what you guys think about that.
That's a very, very good point.
It is for both of you.
Yeah,
so
that's an excellent point, and which was one of the points I wanted to make in my presentation, which is the 21st century economy. The 21st century worker is an innovator, and the 21st century worker needs to be able to take a task and take it from beginning to end, to pilot tested to see what works and what doesn't work. And that is what employers are really looking for today. We're not going to go back to the manufacturing-based economy that we once had, right? That's a 20th century model, and it's gone. So today's economy is based on small production, handmade. That's why you have this sort of resurgence of craft beers and locally grown and individualized sort of products and services, and then also on innovation. How can you take a product and improve it, make it more useful, make it more attractive, make it cool, so on and so forth. So when we're talking with schools and educators about the arts, we're really talking about the fact that the arts provide space for young people to practice the art, the skill of creative problem solving and innovating.
And I would say, on the one hand, schools should not be at the service of the industrial model anymore. That's not, whoever decided education should turn out drones, they gotta leave. So you want drones and you want everybody on depression medication, that just doesn't fit anymore. And the other thing is, we have an application of our program for corporations called the new intrapreneur. That those entrepreneurial capacities can definitely, you want people who are resourceful, you want people who are innovative, you want people who are problem solving, you want people who are happy. And you can be creative and still work at a job. It's not like either or. So it's kind of like, how do you make a well-rounded individual where they can focus on the task at hand and bring a lot more of their creativity to the workplace? But we really do have to get out of this industrial model thinking that, schools are just to kind of send people out to get a 9-to-5 job.
Well, can I just ask a follow-up to that, which would just be, do you hear that then from folks who are leaders either in the industrial complex or in business, or do you hear it from education leaders, or do you hear it from political leaders saying, we want different types of people to come out of this?
I will just say, and this has been, forever. I just remember, corporations want people with a liberal arts education who can think creatively. I mean, that's always what they've said, right. But it doesn't somehow trickle down to kind of the mainstream thinking about such things. So.
Yeah. Okay, other questions? Hands in the audience. Yeah, right there.
I loved what you both shared. It was absolutely fabulous and very, very exciting. And I was wondering, what do you sort of see as the biggest challenge to be able to have? What's the limiting factor? What's the block? What do we need to do to bring about what both of you are trying to bring into our world, to birth into our world?
she and I need to go on a tour together and just talk to everybody.
Yeah.
I think it's an awareness thing. I think people just assume, well, this is how it is, and we just, if it's not working, just gotta do the same thing more and harder to make it work. And they just need to have the awareness of options and why it isn't working so well, what we're doing.
And I would agree. I would also really shine a light on sort of the core of my presentation, which was about people understanding how the arts are impactful across everything in life to a large degree. And I think that understanding is both in terms of educators and politicians and sort of community members with regard to the arts. I also think that understanding is something that needs to be better articulated by artists ourselves. I think often artists are in a space of feeling very special and on a pedestal, and no one can understand the magic thing we do, and it sits here, and you should come in and watch it and see it and partake in it. And again, so back to this sort of misunderstanding about the arts being the product of individual genius versus the result of our collective creative capacity. So I think those two things sort of feed off of each other, and the awareness piece is really the bottom line.
My question is based in, I think, two realities, and I work, I'll be honest, at Northside Achievement Zone, and the reality that over 70% of our kids, when they get to school, can't read and write at grade level, right? And
What was that percent again? One more time.
Over 70%.
70%.
Yeah, can't read and write at grade level, which is necessary at some capacity, right? And then the reality of the education paradigm as it is, and our kids who are in it right now, who have to succeed in it the way it is. How do the arts play into supporting, and I love that you work for Edo, and I'm going to call Edo out because I worked with Edo a couple years ago as well. How do we support those kids in a realistic educational system and saying, yeah, yes and, right? And it's not one or the other, but yes and. You have to be able to read and write, plus what's happening, and DeAnna's one of my partners, so I'll be honest there too. Yeah. And we also have to value and put the time into what's going on, and you only have 24 hours in a day. How do we get them to the point where they can be in the system that is suffocating in some ways, but it's the only way they're being allowed to succeed right now?
Well,
So I need to repeat the question.
Can you do all of that?
And I cannot. But just to try and recap very briefly was, the question was, is it possible to, or how can we use the arts to build into a very realistic constraints that we have around the education system that we have? How can the arts play into the constraints that teachers and educators and schools have right now for the things that they do need to do, and yes, and to use a very good improv term, to build upon those necessary things and build larger and beyond that to some of the self-actualization?
So I'll say that, I had shop class, I had jewelry making, I had art history, I had music appreciation. It worked back then. Slowly, there's been this move to just get rid of all of that with this intense focus on math, science, and language arts. My Discovery of Self program has gone into schools during the school day. So 2 times a week, or even 1 time a week, they get an hour of this. And over the course of 9 months, or even 6 months or 3 months, it's very transformational. So there are many ways to get arts back in, but we have to get off this bandwagon of more math, science, and verbal skills. It's just kind of in everyone's mind, that's what intelligence is. And so that needs to be expanded. No, that's a piece, but we need to, in a school day, re-include those things that we've gotten rid of and maybe add some other components like discover yourself.
But that's not how school is right now. Like, our kids don't have that. So how do we get them to?
Well,
So the point was that that's not what schools have now.
so there have to be some decision makers who get the information in such a way that they go, oh, okay, let's start making some changes. So how do you get those decision makers to sit in a room and go, you know what, we really need to shift?
Well, I want to follow up on this just a little bit too, and I promise I'll come to the staff people who are who invited me to be here. But one of the challenges I always face, because I'm an artist and I think the arts are very important to school. But I always think about how do you design a school system, right? Even on a district level, and then you think about on a big, large level, right? And we talk about industrialization as something that we can all sort of look at and say, oh, that's very bad. But then if I were somewhere and I was trying to think about how do I make sure that all these kids are actually coming out of this with the things that they need, I get scared probably, right? And I think there's things that I have to make sure that they get. And so then I move towards that industrialization process because I'm like, I have to make sure that they get these things.
If we got rid of these standardized tests and shifted our understanding of what kids need to learn to be healthy, whole individuals, it wouldn't be so challenging.
But isn't that the question? What is a healthy, whole individual?
DeAnna?
So I guess the other point I would make is that we also need to take control of our children's education as parents and find the educational environment that is a fit for those young people. I have a 16-year-old son, very much like his parents, not doing so well in high school, was gifted and talented in grade school and middle school, and now in high school, his interest in sitting in a classroom and hearing from teachers has waned tremendously. And then he gets overwhelmed because now he's behind, and am I ever going to be able to catch up? This is too much. It's going to be impossible, and so on. He took some classes, night classes, at an alternative school this last semester that didn't require homework, and he got straight A's. And for some parents, that would be considered a failure, right? He couldn't succeed in the regular traditional school that's homework intensive, test intensive. But to me, the fact that he could go to a school, do the work, didn't have to do homework because he's not going to do it anyway, and get straight A's, and could come home feeling proud of who he is and feeling confident in what he has to contribute to the world is success. So I think that is a critical component of how we need to think about restructuring our educational system so it's centered on the young people, not centered on the institution, right?
Okay, we have time for maybe one or two more questions depending, so... Yes, right. That's fine. You go nuts.
I was going to say I'll let someone else go. So this is more of a personal question. I was definitely, and still probably am, a very left-brained person. And I've always had a hard time working with my right brain, I guess. And always felt like, well, I'm not a good artist. I shouldn't be creative. And it took me well into my adulthood to realize that my creativity maybe comes out in different ways, whether it's cooking or maybe problem solving. But how are you reaching out to kids who may have been like me, who are like, ew, my painting doesn't look like I want it to look in my head. Now what?
How do you reach out to kids who don't think of themselves as creative or don't necessarily think of themselves as right or left brain?
Sure. So we tell kids that just like any other skill, any other area of expertise, you can become good at painting or drawing through practice. And the commonplace that it takes, 10,000 hours to become an expertise? So we say, here's the paper, here's the brush, get started on your 10,000 hours. This idea that art and creativity is based on some sort of innate talent, again, is this sort of artists are very precious sort of belief that we have, and it's not true. You can learn to draw, you can learn to paint. Now that's not to take away from the fact that some people have a more natural inclination to cook. They know what ingredients to put together that are going to taste perfect without having to read a recipe. But everybody can learn to cook. Everybody can learn to paint. Everybody can learn to draw. So that's what we tell young people. And then they get to see the impact over time. In a very short period of time, 2 or 3 weeks into a program, they can see that they've gotten better than when they started. So.
And I would just say, expanding that idea of creativity, it's having an idea and executing it. So creating something in your mind and then manifesting it. To me, that's the creative process. And using your imagination. So if you were to sit there and just, most people don't play, they don't use their imagination, they just think about what they already know and how things were and how things are. But to just kind of play with your imagination, which, unfortunately, when there was radio, you would get something and then in your mind you'd have to create the pictures. Now everything's provided for you. All the stimulation's right there, and so we kind of shortcut and short-circuit that imagination process. But developing your right hemisphere can happen many ways, and part of it is just to exercise your imagination and your introspection, paying attention to how you feel. And the left brain is very much about kind of managing things, and so to be doing relaxation strategies to get you more into the right hemisphere is another way. So creativity and the right hemisphere is more than, the art is a great exercise in kind of practicing that, but there are many ways to be creative and access the right hemisphere.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, can we do one more big round of applause for our two guests, DeAnna Cummings, Jane Barrash.